Occasionally, the sole viable course of action is to confront the truth, regardless of the difficulty it may present, and to be candid with oneself and those in one's vicinity. This was not the conclusion of my narrative, rather it marked the commencement of a new chapter. This chapter would provide me with the opportunity to learn, develop, and, with any luck, resolve the fractures in my heart that had occurred during the course of my journey. My narrative commenced with innocence. I was inseparable from my sibling Anuka. We divulged all of our secrets, anxieties, and aspirations. She was my confidant, my closest friend, and my role model. I was ecstatic when she wedded Rohan. He was profoundly in love with her, charming and kind. They were the ideal coupling, the type that everyone admired. I was married to Arjun at the time. Our marriage was stable, despite the fact that it was not ideal, and we had been together for 6 years. I never envisaged that I would be able to betray him or my sister, despite the fact that we had our ups and downs. However, life has a tendency to put us to the proof in unexpected ways. It commenced during a challenging period in my marriage. Arjun and I had become increasingly estranged. We were merely going through the motions, and the flame that had once animated us was ebbing away. I experienced feelings of invisibility, unlove, and unappreciation. I was unaware of how to resolve the issue, and he was as well. I found myself confiding in Rohan during one of Anuka and Rohan's visits. For the first time in a long time, I felt heard, and he was simple to converse with. We discussed our challenges, including the sense of invisibility we both experienced in our marriages. The situation began innocently, but I was aware of its potential peril. I was unable to fall asleep that evening. I couldn't help but replay our conversation in my mind. I convinced myself that it was innocuous, it was merely two acquaintances providing mutual support. However, the reality was that I was crossing a line that I had never anticipated. Rohan and I maintained communication for the subsequent months. The communications originated as informal check-ins. However, they evolved into something more substantial over time. We were relying on each other in ways that were not appropriate. I deluded myself into believing that it was merely a friendship, but I was aware that it was more profound than that. We convened at a cafe one evening. Although it was raining, the atmosphere was imbued with an energy that I was unable to identify. For the first time in a long time, I felt alive as we conversed for hours. However, I also experienced feelings of guiltiness. I was aware that our actions were immoral, however, I was unable to halt. I was unable to fall asleep that evening. I was repeatedly informing myself to terminate the situation, to withdraw before it was too late. However, the reality was that I was unwilling to do so. I was addicted to the manner in which he made me feel valued, desired, and seen. The remorse persisted, as did the messages. I was aware that I was betraying Arjun and Anuka, but I was unable to prevent myself from doing so. I was in too much of a bind. Reunited once more, this time in a tranquil park. The tension between us was intolerable. I stated that this is incorrect. However, neither of us made any changes. We both found ourselves on the brink of an experience from which we would never recover. Arjun confronted me one evening. He stated, "I am aware that there is an issue." I was struck by the force of his words. I desired to refute it in order to inform him that he was mistaken, but I was unable to do so. The truth was written all over my visage. I was unable to fall asleep that evening. I was aware that I had to conclude my relationship with Rohan, however, I was uncertain as to how. I was divided between the life I had and the life I desired. Anuka contacted me the following day. Her voice was trembling. She inquired as to how you could do so. I was unable to articulate my defense. I had betrayed the sole individual who had consistently supported me. Ultimately, I forfeited my marriage, my sister, and the trust of my loved ones. However, this was not the conclusion of my narrative. It was the commencement of a new chapter. A chapter in which I was compelled to confront the truth. Regardless of the difficulty, I discovered that there are instances in which the sole viable course of action is to confront the truth, to be forthright with oneself and those in one's vicinity. Although it was challenging, it was indispensable. I was compelled to confront the suffering I had inflicted and devise a method of recovery. I commenced journaling, expressing my emotions and thoughts on paper. It was a cathartic experience that facilitated my comprehension of the events that had transpired. I came to the realization that I had been in search of a love connection and validation, but I had been seeking in the wrong places. Additionally, I initiated therapy. It was challenging to disclose my errors, however, it was imperative. I required an understanding of the rationale behind my decisions and the methods by which I could prevent myself from repeating them in the future. Arjun and I resumed our conversation. Although it was challenging, we both acknowledged that we had made errors. In order to restore the trust that had been shattered, we elected to proceed cautiously. Additionally, Anuka and I resumed our conversations. It was not identical to the previous version, however, it was a beginning. I was aware that I had a significant amount of work to do in order to regain her trust, but I was prepared to put in the effort. This was not the conclusion of my narrative. It was the commencement of a new chapter. A chapter in which I could learn, develop, and with any luck, discover a method to mend the fragments of my heart that had been shattered during the journey. It is never too late to start over, to be honest with yourself, and to confront the truth, as life is messy and we all make errors. This is my narrative, a narrative of redemption, regret, and betrayal. The story's just beginning. There are more broken hearts and dark secrets ahead. Hit like, subscribe, and keep exploring with Love Missteps.